But good morning and welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning for How to Lead. This series of events has been designed and created to bring speakers and panelists from differing sectors together to share their experiences of the past year and how we can all innovate, collaborate and lead more effectively. But before we introduce the speakers, a quick introduction to who I am and what Heifer Innovation is. So I'm your host for this morning, Jordan from Heifer Innovation, and we help businesses to innovate, incubate and accelerate. So we help businesses to innovate and accelerate through the free support provided through Breakthrough, which is our European funded program. And through this program, we deliver workshops, training, events, networking, and bespoke one-to-one support services to allow your business to grow. We also incubate through our sites at Heifer Engineering Centre and Scotstow Enterprise Park, giving you the space and on-site support you need to help grow your business. But before we get started and before I introduce the session, I want to launch a quick poll to see who's awake, who's getting engaged in the session. So I've got two quick questions. One would be to see how our morning work rituals have changed, and the other to see what you think leadership means, what leadership means to you. So I'm going to launch the first poll of the day. Hopefully that's now on your screen. So the first question, just to get us started, what is the first thing you do when you get to work in the morning? So I've put get to work in quotation marks because get to work could mean anything now. It could mean actually going into work, it could be going across the landing, it could be going downstairs, it could be in the conservatory, maybe not in this weather. But what is the first thing that you do when you get to work in the morning? So I've already got some answers coming in. And the second thing I want to know is, what does the word leadership mean to you? Obviously, leadership can mean a hell of a lot of different things. I've just given you a few choices. Let us know what leadership means to you. So a few more of you to answer that, so please let us know. All of the answers for all of the questions are anonymous. So if the first thing you do when you get to work is pet a dog, let us know. If you want to be awfully cynical, where some of these questions will be later on in the talks, please be cynical, please be negative. So give you just a few more seconds to answer that, because we've got a few more waiting on that. There we go. So end polls there, going to share the results with you. Hopefully you can all see that now. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the majority of you, the first thing you do is check your emails. We've got the standard kind of hot drink, petting a dog perhaps has become a more usual routine for all of you. And then we've got chatting with the colleagues and checking LinkedIn. Leadership, what does it mean to you? We've got the forward thinking, we've got decision makers and developers, but the most popular definition of leadership for you is the supporter. Be very interesting to see how the word leadership has changed to all of us in this call over the past year, and to see what is the most important word in that time. So I'll stop sharing those results. I'm going to carry on. So thanks for getting involved in that first poll. So How to Lead is the third and final session of our How To series. Last week we were joined by support networks, a manufacturing body and creative organisations to learn how we can collaborate more effectively. And the recording of that session is available on our YouTube channel. And also so is our How To Innovate session, which happened in January as well. But today we're going to take a look at leadership and how this has changed over the past 12 months. A Gartner study showed in 2019 that only half of leaders felt confident leading their teams. Most probably impacted in some form by COVID-19, how has this changed in 2020 and 2021? The study showed that leaders using complementary leadership saw a 60% increase in team performance and 40% in their own performance. With many industries having to relocate and reallocate their teams to work remotely, the importance of well-being and mental health support has never been more important. In our How to Innovate session in January, we found that our attendees voted employee well-being as the joint most focused form of innovation over the past 12 months. So has this led to boosted performance? But then who is there to support the leader? We hope that over the next hour and a half, you hear from speakers from sectors you typically wouldn't hear from, discover similarities and stark differences between the sectors you operate in, and how the findings, opinions, and experiences felt over the past year could be implemented into your organisation. The session will begin with our panellists providing a 5-minute lightning talk, showing how they and the organisations around them have been able to lead or how they've led differently over the past year. We'll then go into our Q&A section where you can ask our panellists what's on your mind or anything you'd like expanded upon. The recording will be made available following the session. Do not fear if for whatever reason you need to get up, stretch your legs, grab a drink, or are unable to stay for the entire event. So I'm delighted to welcome our panel today, Jonathan Batchelor from SoLogic, Charlotte Horobin from Make UK, Andy Vassallo from the University of East Anglia, Will Bridgman from Warren Services, and Alice Reeve from Hethel Innovation. But before we get started into our lightning talks, I have another poll to launch, making sure I get my money's worth out of all of you attendees today. So, I'm going to launch the polls now. Got 2 questions for you again, and I'm interested to learn how COVID has potentially impacted your organisation over the past 12 months. So do you agree with this statement? The conditions created in the last year has forced us to develop a new and improved strategy for our organisation. So you've got agree, which means you've had to adapt over the past year. Disagree, perhaps your strategy hasn't been effective and continues to be effective and help you to grow. And then secondly, do you agree with the statement of the conditions created in the last year have led our organisation to review and improve the way it supports its workforce? So again, be interesting to see how things have changed over the past 12 months. What we will be doing with this information, we will be creating infographics to share with all of you, whether it be particularly useful for you to influence future strategy making, to see how industry and organisations have changed over the past 12 months. So just give you a few more seconds for those who haven't answered and responded to this poll. And again, if you have anything you want to contribute relating to these questions, please feel free to type in the chat or even get your questions in early for the Q&A section. So that ends the polls there. I will now share the results. So overwhelmingly, the majority of us in this call have had to, well, agree that we have reviewed and improved the strategy for our organisation. And also the conditions created in the last year have led to organisations reviewing in the way it supports its workforce. So perhaps unsurprisingly there. So I'm going to stop sharing those poll results now. And we can move into our lightning talks. So first up, we have Jonathan Batchelor. Jonathan leads the strategic, operational and commercial activities for SoLogic across the EMEA region, together with his role as part of the global senior leadership team. Used by leading organisations around the world, SoLogic's methodology underpins key processes in problem solving, risk reduction and business improvement. The SoLogic process and supporting software are used widely within production, manufacturing, finance, healthcare, technology and oil and gas. So over to you, Jonathan.
Morning all, thanks Jordan for the introduction. Almost sounds like I wrote it myself. So as Jordan said, so I'm Jonathan Batchelor. I'm the Managing Director for SoLogic across the European, Middle Eastern and African region. SoLogic are effectively a one-trick pony. So across all of our global locations, we do one thing, and that is root cause analysis. Root cause analysis being complex problem solving, really, if we distill it down, which means that we don't sit in any one sector, because there is no one sector that is immune from problems. They all have them, but they differ. Within the area that I manage, we operate over 18 countries and deliver in 5 languages. We have team members that are based in 4 countries outside of the UK. So the impact of COVID was almost an instant impact for us, because our delivery was face-to-face primarily. To give you an overview of our clients and how they spread, so we do a lot of work with Cargill, food producer, fairly key in the COVID world. We do a lot of frequent work with Air Products, who produce industrial gases, namely oxygen for hospitals. And a lot of the large UK and European banks, who had a whole shift change in how they had to interact with their customers with regards to payment holidays and furloughs and the complexity that all of that brought. So from an internal team point of view, what we did when COVID hit is we stopped. Part of that was enforced because our travel had to stop. We couldn't go face to face to our clients. But also for 3 years prior to last March, we hadn't stopped. And actually it gave us a really priceless opportunity for 2 weeks just to genuinely stop and breathe. We didn't have to do anything for 2 weeks because we couldn't go and see anyone. There was an intentional pause in the pivot and the development of what we did, because we needed 2 weeks to decompress, to slow down, and then to start to plan. And what very quickly became apparent is our external conversations slowed, but our internal conversations sped up more than ever, because we were always in different airports, different countries, different buildings. And this, one of the positives of this was it made us all have the same space in our diary to think about how we could improve and change. And we see a lot in the commercial world where people implement fixes or solutions without thinking about the effect of systems theory. So if we make a change here, what happens over here? And so we were very determined to analyze what we do and how we do it to ensure that a knee-jerk, fast change in our offering, in how we deliver it and how we promote ourselves, didn't have a negative impact on the quality of what we delivered. So I suppose in summary is we are daily plugged into a number of the key industry sectors that work at a high level normally and worked at an even higher level, a more intense level during the early days of the pandemic. And it was our job to step back and prepare ourselves when they were ready for the next conversation, really. I've not looked at the watch, Jordan, so I don't know if that was 5 minutes, 2 minutes or 7, but
I mean, you've got another 2 minutes. But if you
okay. Well, just building on that then, people think that these large organizations that are staffed by really clever people can solve problems themselves. But what we come in and we give them a structured methodology that is a methodology that helps them identify the causal factors that come together for these problems, and then identify a number of solutions. Unfortunately, it's called root cause analysis, but it's never singular. I'd love to change the name, but that's too old now for us to go there. So we're looking at multiple causes and ways to break the causal chain. And when we talk about leadership and when we talk about cultural elements within the business, problems are very badly behaved. They don't stay in their silos, they don't stay in their departments or their area of business. So if that business can have a core number of people that all have a really confident and capable understanding of a problem-solving methodology, they can then go in and assist with the structured problem-solving and the investigation. So if we have a production or a manufacturing issue within the business, the power of getting someone from HR or from legal within that problem-solving team, because they will ask the questions. They go, well, why do you do that? Oh yeah, we've always done that. But why do you do that? And every time that happens, does that happen? And so it's not just the specialisms of their job or their role, it's the confidence that the process gives you to ask the awkward questions, the sometimes seemingly silly questions that unearth these causal factors that come together. So it is structured problem solving, but culturally within a business, it's incredibly powerful.
Perfect. Very good timing there. 5 seconds remaining. So I found it really interesting, Jonathan, when you said about the way that your business has transformed. You've cut down on transport, which has allowed a greater amount of time to innovate within the business. It'd be really interesting to hear more of that when we go into our Q&A section. So next up, let me find it. We have Charlotte from Make UK. Make UK is the largest voice supporting UK manufacturing. Charlotte's role as region director is to engage Make UK's members and leaders and assist them in advancing as a manufacturer by providing bespoke introductions, providing industry insights, attendance at events and networking, promoting their businesses and ensuring that their views are heard. So Charlotte.
Good morning, and thank you very much for that excellent introduction, Jordan. I thought I'd just reflect on what we saw the manufacturing sector do nearly 12 months ago now, and then I'll sort of touch on, I guess, at the end, my own experience. But we really saw the sector offered kind of a beacon of hope to the UK population. We saw with determined leaders who were really keen to support some of the calls and the challenges that came out from government, but also supportive teams, that we were able to demonstrate, the ability to produce 10 years worth of ventilators in a matter of 10 weeks. We were able to make sure that vital equipment was still manufactured. We were able to make sure that food and energy flowed into our homes. And I'm not sure that realisation across the UK population had remained, that UK manufacturing was alive, well, and could respond really in quite an agile way. And that sounds like a little bit of a fairy tale. It wasn't without its bumps, and actually I think one of the first issues around leadership, and I'll have to word this really carefully, was around the first lockdown and the communication that came from the Prime Minister. Personally, for me, I thought it was quite clear, but what became apparent that night as my phone started to ring off the hook was his messaging really hadn't hit the workforce and perhaps employers in quite the same way. And that caused real tension. We almost saw people were divided together. Are you on furlough? Are you not on furlough? Are you a production operator who is going into site and potentially feels at risk? And also those people were, strangely enough, finding themselves being abused in parts of the country as they were leaving their homes, and their neighbours didn't understand why they were going to work. I think it's demanded empathetic and clear communication, but also an element of being a firm leader. So our manufacturing, MDs, chief execs, the boards have made to, they've had to listen to the workforce, they've had to take on their concerns, but they've also had to provide that reassurance, but also the importance as to why they need to come to work. I think one of the best examples I've got is probably an exercise we did with a manufacturer who produced parts, and we talked to them about their narrative of what it was that they did. And this was a marketing exercise a couple of years ago for them to win awards and grow their business. And they make parts that service and make sure that magnetrons can operate. And without the magnetron operating, a really vital piece of cancer treatment equipment fails. And if that fails, then people don't get tret. And I don't think I need to go on much further. But being able to get that narrative across to the workforce as to how important it was that they remained within work, I think has been really, really key. We've seen it again. We've got a business that has been going through a servitisation programme. And as part of that, because they had to transform the business and it was about managing change, they developed a really strong culture. So when their MD said, look, we need to make parts for the ventilator challenge, their workforce straight away, not a problem, we'll be there day, night, whatever you need, we'll work tirelessly. And that really showed that those leaders that could delegate and could empower their teams have really blossomed. Guys like Will, and I'm not just saying it because Will's here today, you'll find him across our research, people that have embraced digital technologies, they've embraced the next generation to ensure that they've got a really agile and flexible business, for us have come out on top. For me, it's been unusual. I had a new starter actually this year, so a really key person within my own team. We interviewed in February, due to start in March. You can imagine what a situation that was, but it's been fantastic. Yes, I've had to adapt the way that I perhaps train somebody in the way that we communicate, but actually that individual has benefited from a really condensed training period. They've probably got 2 to 3 years worth of experience in a much shorter time. So although I've perhaps changed the way I have to operate, I think the threads about what makes me me are still there. I hope I don't profess to know anything, know everything. I'm in a relatively early part of my career, so for me, I have no issue in taking on great people's ideas, connecting the dots, and getting the best out of people to hopefully get a good end result. Really.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charlotte. I think it's a really interesting point. You're saying that the businesses that have succeeded are those that are the leaders are happy to delegate and also encourage that transition to digital technology. If you have any questions for Charlotte or even Jonathan before and remaining speakers, please let us know in the Q&A when we get into that part of the event. So next up, we have Andy Vassallo from the UEA. With over 20 years in UK manufacturing, Andy is now an associate professor in management and director for the full-time MBA at university. Andy offers the ability to relate theory to real-world experiences, having worked across a broad range of business contexts from both strategic and operational perspectives. So over to you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Jordan. Yeah, so I've been at the business school since 2010, but before that, I think my roots are very firmly planted in manufacturing sector within the Eastern region. I'm delighted to be supporting this event, which has been run by Hethel, who have been brilliant supporters of the business school in recent years. And also through my involvement in Productivity East, which is a developing collaborative partnership between the university, education and industry, particularly focused on engineering and manufacturing sector. I wanted to start with just a bit of a consideration of the leadership landscape at the moment, and disruptive innovation, technology driven, new ways of working. We've all heard that and had to deal with that, and I think it's further been fueled by political change, particularly in the UK. We're starting to talk a lot at the business school about the iPhone generation customer side, in terms of customers wanting far more customized products and responsive services. There's additional demands there. What we're hearing from large employers, so GlaxoSmithKline, IBM and so on, is they're now looking for leaders that can deal far more effectively with ambiguity. There's one fantastic quote recently where one of the recruitment consultants was saying where the answers can't be found on Google, which I thought was particularly interesting. I think the same is true now of established businesses where a dominant logic way of working might no longer be as effective and needs to be adapted and changed completely in some cases. And I think the research is all pointing us to this wonderful term, the technology paradox, where they're kind of saying the more everyone's kind of lives moves online, the more those kind of human skills are going to be more important. And of course, central to that would be leadership. It's going to be more of an acute skill because there's more distance between the leaders and followers in an online setting, of course. But central to that is the connection of human beings being critical to business success, relationships with customers and so on. So that's what I wanted to kind of add as a kind of a landscape picture, if you like. I think the challenges for leadership are bringing in those new skills and new ways of working to sit alongside existing experience and kind of managing that transition. I think for managers and leaders, it's also important in managing self in a time of crisis, keep making good decisions, keep making rational and objective decisions. We're lucky that we talk to quite a lot of CEOs, and lots of them talk about the loneliness of leadership. They talk about the fact they're responsible for themselves, the workforce, families, impact on communities even. And those people are all looking to those leaders, for stability, for control, for calmness, for assurance. I think fundamentally it's about trust and confidence in the people that are taking the decisions that are affecting the lives of a huge number of people in some cases. I think with the current situation, there is a stabilizing factor in all this, which is that the sense of common purpose, the sense that we're all in this together, which I don't feel is the same in other kind of disruptive changes that have happened in recent years. I have to say, a fascinating observation, just tagging on to one of the earlier points about the national leaders' behaviour in these times of crisis, has been the behaviours and the drivers of decisions and the influence of personality, which seems quite core to some of the decision-making processes when you compare and contrast some of the approaches to dealing with the pandemic. In terms of leading and having an impact in leadership, we talk a lot about emotional intelligence and the understanding of self, and going back to that quote about personality, understanding your innate biases and being able to self-regulate those and being focused on displaying behaviours that have a positive impact on others. I think the comment earlier in the earlier discussion around authenticity is absolutely spot on. You know, being true to yourself and your values is a high stress place to find yourself, in a place where you're having to take decisions that don't sit comfortably with who you are as a person in terms of leaders. And therefore it also is about recognizing where you're not strong on your own. You know, that idea of resilience and having those support networks has never been truer in terms of a group of people that you can have honest and open discussions about what your concerns and what your stresses are. You know, mentoring, coaching certainly helps with that. Lots of the research is pointing to using your direct team as a secure base. That has to be nurtured, of course, to be able to get to that point. An openness to question prior assumptions as well. I think now there's a greater need for leaders to question whether decisions and those assumptions of the right way to do things is actually valid anymore, is becoming more effective or less effective. And of course, those questions will be in the minds of employees that will have had to change their ways of working through the pandemic, particularly in lockdown. And I guess it's about leaders being open and responsive to that, to harvest some of those ideas and opportunities for positive change. And it's about visibility and transparency, in terms of not forgetting that it's the people inside the organisation that are looking for that leadership, and making sure that leaders have time, whether that's team leader or CEO level, for the people that work for them. I think if I've had three key thoughts to leave you with, it's about trust. It can't be earned in one conversation. The roots go back far further back than that. But in terms of crisis, I think it's about how you care for casualties. You know, people that are anxious, are stressed, and not coping well with this. And the whole organisation is looking at how leaders are handling, you know, difficult situations for everyone. I think it's about attenuation as well. It's about listening, and really listening and hearing what the voice of the organisation is telling you. Hard to do when you're under pressure yourself. And also it's about being human. I think it's about knowing when to take the armour off, if you like, knowing and dealing with difficult situations sensitively. And again, you know, so we're back to those earlier ideas in terms of theoretical ideas, but I think those are three critical things for leaders to kind of handle usefully through these kind of challenging times. That's it. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. I really like your point about the importance of human skills as we are transitioning to a more digital world and a more digital way of working, and the physical distance between the leader and the workforce. It's really important that these human skills are still existent in our leaders.
Absolutely. Still human organisations, you know, still human customers. So, yeah, vital.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we now move on to Will Bridgman. Will is the chairman of Warren Services and also holds advisory roles within other businesses. With over 20 years in the manufacturing sector at senior management level, Will has been at the forefront of significant changes within the industry and has always strived to ensure his company keeps pace with the latest developments in engineering and design. So Will, pass over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So, yeah, rightly, as Jordan said, I'm chairman of Warren Services, a machine builder based in Thetford, Norfolk. So we make custom machines for people around the world, from high-speed winches for the theatre industry to pill coating technology for the pharmaceutical sector, and more recently, quite a lot in off-site construction. So we make balcony systems for high-rise residential. But now a lot around online delivery, online grocery, automation, whether that be in the UK or abroad. Leadership. You know, did we change our leadership due to COVID? Probably not, but we had to tune it very slightly. So, you know, we continued working as normal. You know, we had no one furloughed, apart from a couple of people, you know, from medical reasons that couldn't come to work. We obviously had to change quite a lot. You know, we had to listen to our staff. And as Charlotte said, the communication from the Prime Minister, and don't get me wrong, I wouldn't have wanted his job, was poor, very poor to businesses. So there was us reading very deeply into it, thinking, yep, we can carry on operating. We're supporting the food manufacturing sector. There's nothing about people that need to operate plant that can't come to work. But rightly, as Charlotte said again, you know, I've suffered some abuse on social media around, you know, why haven't you shut the factory? Well, who's going to deliver the machines that deliver the food? You know, people didn't quite get it, and I think that was, the communication got better, but by that point, you know, people are like, well, are we key workers? You know, people were nervous about coming to work, but what we did was focused on our people, as we always do, and listened to their concerns. So we made 4 independent teams. So we split the shifts into, you know, mornings and lates that didn't, you know, cross each other, and over 2 factories that didn't mix. So that protected our people, but also our business. So if we had an outbreak, we would only lose a quarter of the staff potentially. And it was that ability and that agility to change, making ventilator parts. Very, very stressful for the business. But because we've built up that, you know, that team at Warren Service, you know, there's 115 people. I just happen to be the chairman and the owner along with my family, but we're 115 people business, a team, and each one of those is as important as, you know, each other, you know, relevant of whether they're an apprentice or they're the managing director. And, you know, they stepped up to the mark, you know, working over Easter, you know, we changed from 2 shifts to 3 shifts, you know, to make sure that we could fulfill these ventilator parts. And then we saw fellow businesses struggling in the hospitality sector with, you know, how are we going to socially distance? So friends of mine have got businesses in that sector. So I was like, oh, we could do something with that. Let's think about a modular screen system. So a few days later, we designed a system, deployed it at the Verse restaurant, and then orders started to come in. We quickly realized that we're not a business that services lots of customers. You know, we make great products for a limited number of people, and servicing hundreds of people phoning up wanting screens is a completely different thing for our business. And we did what we could, but we realized our strategy, you know, is not to do that moving forward. But while we were talking, I really believe leadership is about surrounding yourself with great people. You know, I'm not the best leader in the world. I've got quite a butterfly mind, you know, and that's why we find innovation quite easy. But that's not great when you need to be leading a business. So I realized a number of years ago that I needed a managing director that was a more stable person for people to look at, rather than me darting around making crazy ideas up. You know, when you've got 115 people relying on you for, you know, paying their mortgage and paying their wages, you need someone. So I think it's also about you understanding your weakness and filling that weakness with great people. And now I've got a board full of people that are far superior to me, you know, and it's my understanding of my weakness that then makes that better, I believe. And I think also great leadership is shown in how we support the weakest in our business, and not weakest in a bad way, but certain people have struggled with mental health throughout this time, or financially, you know. It's about how we're judged on how we deal with those problems. You know, it's not how we support the guy that's doing an amazing job. It's about how we support those people that are really struggling, because they will be great employees, and they are already great employees. They're just struggling at this time, and hopefully, you know, we're coming out of the back of that. Yeah, so I think leadership can mean lots of different things to lots of different people, but I think communication is, you know, making sure, you know, we're now doing a 10-day piece of work with the MTC, one of the high value manufacturing catalogs, around our strategy. You know, we're 30 years old, but we had a strategy, but we hadn't properly communicated it to all 115 team members. So let's take this opportunity to re-look at that strategy and make sure we communicate that throughout the business. And I think one of the fundamental parts of that is that I've taken on is creating a shadow board made up completely of apprentices. So using them not to talk about their apprentices and their apprenticeship problems and that sort of stuff, that's dealt with in other forums, but to actually use them to help us solve the business problems. And I think if I can effectively lead that team, you know, they can make great differences to our business moving forward. Cheers, Jordan.
Brilliant. Thanks, Will. I really like your point about surrounding yourself with a team who complement the skills of the leader. You know, it's a really, really
Yeah, or more importantly, the weaknesses of the leader. I think it's knowing that weakness that makes the difference. That self-reflection.
Brilliant. So if you've got any questions for Will or any of the previous speakers, please let us know in the Q&A. But last but not least, we move on to Alice Reeve, the CEO of Hethel Innovation. As CEO, Alice leads the company growth plans, including internal innovation and the launch of new offerings, whilst developing external partnerships and opportunities. A large part of her role is focused on implementing more agile working to improve Hethel Innovation's offering, both for customers and staff, to ensure they can continue to grow sustainably. So Alice.
Thank you, Jordan. I won't give another introduction to Hethel because Jordan did a fantastic one at the start, so I'll dive right into it. So I became CEO around 12 months ago, so perfectly stepped into that role, ready for COVID to hit. So it was a very different year to what I was expecting and what I was prepared for. And to be kind of completely open and honest with everyone who's here as an attendee, it was really difficult. I found the last year very challenging, difficult in terms of the tasks that I had to do, the decisions I had to make, and then personally as well. And I think the key thing that I've learned is that if I'm struggling, think about what other people are struggling with as well, and be empathetic to your guys. I mean, we've said that already, but if you treat everyone as one team and you talk to them and you give them time to come to you with challenges that they have, you're going to build those much stronger relationships than if you kind of lead from the top, make decisions, go through the organisation and don't engage anyone with it. So kind of picking up on what everyone has already said in the previous talks, I completely agree with that. I think something that I learned very early on was there's a lot of pressure coming from all sorts of different places, whether that's personal or work. And I was kind of looking around going, oh, Google's doing this big UK business is doing that. What am I meant to do with Hethel? Am I going to close the office, send everyone home? And I had to change my thought process there. It's not pressure and I suppose competition from those businesses going, oh, Google's doing a much better job than us. Google's a very different company to us. They are so much bigger. So, okay, they're doing a great job. Let's take inspiration from it. Let's have that conversation with the guy. So go to Jordan and the team he works in. This is what Google's doing. This is what so-and-so are doing. What can we learn from? What are we going to implement? So instead of putting and adding that extra pressure on yourself by looking around and seeing what others are doing and comparing yourself to them, we like to say internally, why can't we steal some ideas from them, take inspiration from them? So that was a real kind of mindset shift for me at the start that I had to keep working on, because I would often fall back into the, oh, we're not doing enough and not doing the right things. But actually, and agreeing with what was said before, the best ideas have come from the team and they haven't come from me. And it was picked up in the poll that I think leadership is about supporting and it's about facilitating your teams and your guys to be able to do what they need to do. They're the ones that are on the ground. They're the ones that know the situation or your work the most. So learn and listen from them. So just make sure that there's time to talk about those kinds of things. I think in the first lockdown, we had quite a shift to, right, we're at home, back-to-back Zoom meetings, let's talk all the time, get on with work, there's no time to breathe. And we were having people burn out very quickly, whether they were saying it or not, and me included. I was kind of working too many hours. But I think we've now got into that process of, let's leave time in meetings to just have a chat. Let's do some fun things. We use Slack. So let's have some conversations on there, which are just that funny office talk that you would have if you were all there together. It doesn't have to be work, productive, making the most of all the hours all of the time. There is still time to have fun. And when we're not able to go out on the weekend, people really appreciate that. And I've really appreciated that contact with our team via Slack over the last year. It's been really valuable. I think the only other thing I would say is that you have to kind of leave time for yourself. And I know we've struggled with that, especially during first lockdown, but over the whole year, that if you do need to step away from your computer, and it goes back to needing to be productive all the time, If you need to step away to do something more creative, I had to draw a diagram the other day and I just couldn't do it. So I went and sat in a different room with a bit of paper and had a go. You don't have to be completely focused answering emails all the time. I saw a wonderful thing the other day. Someone had an email signature saying, I work really odd hours. I don't expect you to reply to this. And I thought, that's wonderful. Yes, that email came at 11 o'clock at night. I'm not going to answer it now. I should be in bed or going to sleep. So it's about just making that time for you, both as a leader and showing your teams and your guys that is okay. You need to lead from the front and be an example. So if you want your guys to look after themselves, you need to do that too. So yeah, I think that's kind of a bit of a roundup, more personal than what Hethel has done, but hopefully that's okay, Jordan.
Perfect, and fantastic timing as well. 2 points I really like in that talk was the best ideas do come from the team, Alice. So really good point there, and also the ability to lead by example in terms of self-care and well-being. I think it's a really interesting point. So thanks to all of the speakers for providing those lightning talks. Before we get into our Q&A section, however, we're going to quickly launch into another round of polls. So this time, a bit more work for you all. We've got 3 questions. So the first being, over the past year, what's been the biggest barrier for your organisation when working collaboratively up and down the hierarchy? That's to say, if you do have a particular tall vertical hierarchy or if it's relatively flat. The second question being, as a leader, what's been the biggest personal challenge for you over the past 12 months? And again, just want to remind you, all of these responses are anonymous, so we will not know what you have individually have answered. And also, what has been the biggest challenge for your organisation over the past 12 months? I'll give you a bit more time for those 3 questions. Obviously, in this time, please feel free to let us know any questions in the Q&A section. I think Will put it very well. Don't be afraid to ask stupid questions, because the stupid questions can, more often than not, be the most effective ones. I'd like to say I'm very good at asking stupid questions. So, again, 3 questions. Over the past year, what's been the biggest barrier for your organisation when working collaboratively up and down the hierarchy? As a leader, what's been the biggest personal challenge for you over the past 12 months? And finally, what's been the biggest challenge for your organisation over the past 12 months? So I'll give you just a few more moments to answer those questions. A couple of you to answer that. Some answers coming in. Give you just a few more seconds for that. Brilliant, so I'll end the poll there. And now we'll share the results. So, biggest challenges, biggest barriers for organisations when working collaboratively up and down the hierarchy, limited availability, and also technology issues. Maybe that's a particular skew for us living in rural Norfolk and Suffolk with the limited broadband. But very interesting about limited availability, when there's been reports showing that the workforce feel a lot more responsible for always being available. Very interesting there. We have also some unclear outcomes and goals and a lack of transparency between the layers of the hierarchy. As the leader, the biggest personal challenge over the past 12 months, we've got a nice array of answers there, but the most popular being the lack of time and availability. And finally, the biggest challenge for the organisation, perhaps unsurprisingly, has been the unpredictable markets and the ability to generate those sales. As well as that, we have some collaboration challenges, encouraging and pursuing innovation, and finally, the transition to move to digital. Stop sharing those results now. Got one more round of poll. We've just got my favourite question in. I'll save that till after the Q&A section. So we've got some pre-submitted questions, first of all. And the first one goes to Jonathan, which is a bit of a cheeky one. This is from me. But in a previous discussion that we had, you mentioned that SoLogic took the necessary time to ensure that the standard of support did not drop when being provided digitally. What I wanted to ask was, what was the biggest learning point for you when transitioning to that digital delivery and providing that greater amount of support in that way?
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, so some background about why we took that time, I suppose, first. You know, our profession is complex problem solving and the effects you can have if causes come together. And one of the things we saw happening like a tidal wave on LinkedIn, on other business networks, is people that had an existing product put the word virtual in front of it and build it as a virtual product. And it simply was not the case. I mean, I understand some businesses were very keen to ensure the revenue carried on in the same manner it was before COVID hit. But there's some really key structural, educational, and personal reasons why you cannot just deliver what is inherently a face-to-face product by calling it virtual and asking everyone to join a Teams meeting. There's elements where how people work together, how they collaborate, how they take personal cues from each other. The barriers that we break down when we work face-to-face with people, and this goes back to what Andy was saying earlier, if we touch on Industry 4.0 and the way that it's moving, the interrelation we have between humans, between sort of AI and technology, and the way we're used to working, I think there was a lot of stressed, failed, and ineffective products out there that were, in essence, face-to-face but billed as virtual. And I think they were an uncomfortable experience for the customer, for the delegate, and I think they were probably an uncomfortable experience for the person delivering it. And as I said, thankfully, we were so busy leading up to the first lockdown, we took every opportunity we could to breathe and plan. And I'll be open with you, we didn't start commercially delivering our new virtual product until July, because we spent the time together. We spent those 3 months together getting it as good as we could. I won't say getting it brilliant, because you learn brilliant by delivering it the first 2 or 3 times once you've launched it from the July and August onwards. And part of that was us learning not one tool, because we work with so many multinational organizations, we'll develop a product that is delivered using Teams, and then someone will go, well, we only use WebEx from Cisco, or we only use Google Hangouts. And so you can't develop a product that is reliant on the features of one thing. So we had to work out how to convey our learning, how to get people to interact. Because one of the greatest things we do in our face-to-face sessions is people that have previously only ever been an email address to each other. Because we work with organizations that have got 50, 60, 100,000 people in, and they may know an email address, but they don't know the person. And getting them to work together, cross-department, cross-job roles, is really powerful. And we had to replicate that in a digital world. So that was the first part, making sure our offering was as good as it could be in the technical environment that we were allowed. And secondly, we have to remove ourselves, when people are working virtually, they are not the large corporate person that we go and train in their lovely big training center. These are people that are working from home, potentially on their child's homework desk, maybe not even with a laptop or with 2 screens, but maybe on an iPhone or an iPad, because their organization hasn't deployed the hardware yet. So our product had to be suitable for the audience. It had to get them to the point where the learning would be effective when they left us, because the reason we're doing this is that when they've stopped working with us, they are better within the business that they come from. And coupled with that, how do we make it work on the variants of technology and working space they have? So that was the reason we took the space. That was the reason we took the breather. We thought we'd done it really well. We'd launch it in July and we'd launch it perfectly. And in reality, it took us through to at least September to find the wrinkles that we hadn't predicted. That was that really.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Jonathan. Moving on to the next of our pre-submitted questions. Charlotte now. What could manufacturers in the East Anglia region learn from other regions, particularly when improving performance and upskilling employees?
I don't want this to sound a shallow answer, Jordan, but I actually hold the East of England up as a really great example, and the stats back it up. So we've not got the arm wrestle that you might see between some of the disparate cities in, say, the East Midlands. We've not got the big arm wrestle that you see of Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Coventry, some big industrial powerhouses. But what I really do see is that our manufacturers in the East of England solve their own problems. They come together, they collaborate, they work with great institutions like Hethel, and hence you've got the rollout then of the really strong, long-standing name network. And like I say, the stats back it up too. So across the country, actually, the productivity in the East of England is the 3rd highest in the UK, but for manufacturing, it's actually the 2nd. So it's really hard for me to kind of point you elsewhere other than to say, you know, the Northwest is where we hold up first position in terms of that manufacturing productivity, but that also comes down to the types of industry, and you can't always measure apples and pears. So what I do think the region needs is a stronger unified voice. We've got to take the whole narrative and tell it much more consistently, much clearer. I guess a piece of leadership, it's back to that point around communication. And I've seen other regions like the West Midlands do this really well. Commonwealth Games, City of Culture, 5G test beds, catapult centres, you know, the list goes on and on. So we've seen the prize that is there. You've seen Mr. Burnham in the Northwest, you know, a leader who is commanding people to turn and face the north and to listen. So I think there's some fantastic opportunities in the East of England, whether it be clean energy, whether it be future food production, life sciences. There's certainly some great things for us to win more of, but I do think that the region needs to celebrate a little bit. It's doing a really, really good job, but perhaps needs to shout it a little bit louder.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Charlotte. I don't know if Will or Andy, your experience of manufacturing, if there's anything you wanted to add to that, perhaps anything that East of England does particularly well, or things you've learned from other regions of the UK. If not, I'm happy to move on.
I think we're sometimes not confident enough to, you know, shout about what great stuff we do. You know, it's such an amazing spread of manufacturing in like the Eastern region, Norfolk and Suffolk in particular, you know, very, very diverse. You know, we always talk about, you know, renewable energy because it's a big thing, but, you know, from car production to pharmaceuticals, that, you know, it's just, you go down in these little villages and there's a manufacturing business making a world leading product. You know, you've got Myra with these amazing new aircraft seats. You know, we built the Bentley cars that won Le Mans. You know, there's hundreds of examples of this, but we probably don't coherently tell that message as effectively as we could. You know, I don't know the best way to do that, but we've got some gems of businesses in the Eastern region, but maybe sometimes I think the LEP do a pretty good job, you know, of showing what we do and getting the right funding into the region. But I think we as businesses could probably do a better job.
Andy, I see you've unmuted. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to completely agree with Will, really, and you know, it's about outwards and inwards as well. So it's within the region, it's stronger links with education. So we often see very talented engineers, you know, managers that are looking beyond Norfolk and Suffolk. It's not on their radar. So building those links earlier, so that you know, our students do appreciate the opportunities that do exist, and flag waving for some of the successes within the region, so that by the time they're ready to make their, you know, employment choices, we are on the radar in terms of staying in the region and working with some of those organisations. And externally, it's again, you know, as Will and Charlotte just said, it's about shouting a bit more loudly and being a bit more confident, and raising the profile nationally, I think.
Brilliant. And we'll stay with you for one of the pre-submitted questions. Andy, how does the UEA Leadership Programme manage these changes to online education? And what can other industries and organisations learn from this digital experience?
I think that the key thing that the kind of UEA exec team did was the visibility thing. Obviously, UEA is a huge organisation, thousands of his employees, and very diverse in its nature. So, but they cut through the hierarchical boundaries quite quickly, and by week 1 of lockdown, there was weekly meetings. Everyone was on camera. It was the key decision-making team. I think the important thing about those meetings, this is just a personal view, was the balance of information kind of dissemination and listening. So it was kind of 70-30. So it was 30%. We're telling you guys what we're doing and why we're doing it. And now it's about question and answers and really just picking up on what were the concerns about PPE, about, working from home or whatever it was. And then that was being fed into the next session, but also the fact that whatever the questions and issues were, I think the important thing was that they followed up with either actions or explanations as to why things would take a bit longer to resolve. I think so. Is that it was transparency as well about the financial situation, about recovery planning. It dealt with professional anxiety around changing work practices and supported those with resources. But I think underneath everything was the tone of the communication, and particularly from the Vice Chancellor. So it's a CEO equivalent in a private organisation. It's very human. Messages were very much about the priority is health and safety of staff and students. That was a clear statement from the top all the way through, and that continued. I like the the discussion that some of the other panel members have talked about in terms of finding space and being able to rest. So they gave us 3 days and 2 days, what they called COVID rest days, because they were appreciating that everyone was working at 100 miles an hour and appreciated that they just needed to encourage people to take the foot off the pedal a little bit for the longer term good. So I think it's that the humans first bit, I think, was very important in that time of uncertainty. And as I said, the tone of the communication from the CEO talking about his family and his concerns, as well as big decisions that had to be made. I think all of those things really had a positive impact in people.
Brilliant.
Hopefully they translate into other business models as well.
I think that's important. The focus on the human element actually links us quite nicely to the question for Will. Is that what kind of human, what kind of soft skills do you think are often underappreciated when holding leadership position?
Listening.
Yeah.
That's all you need to do. The people will tell you, lots about your business. You've also got to be willing to really listen. Like, don't ask people to tell you things and then don't listen to what they actually say, because that causes massive frustration in the business. We often ask for input and then we make a decision and then we try and explain why we've made that decision, and it doesn't always go, different people have different opinions, so it's not going to suit everyone. But I think that and we need to get better at it, and we're trying to implement things at the moment. It's like up down communication. We've always considered ourselves for many years as being good communicators, but actually we're just checking back on ourselves and realizing, I think we had a discussion about this yesterday, actually, about communicating in different formats. Right, we've got a really important message we need to communicate. Do we do it through the newsletter? Do we do it through briefing? Do we do it through one-to-one? If it's really, really important, that different people take on messages in different ways, and different people want to communicate back to you in different ways. So I think it's tailoring the communication and the listening to the individual, rather than going, this is the company policy and we do this to tick a box. It's about us, because sometimes people say things you don't really want to hear, especially young people. You've been running a business, and like someone said earlier on, it can be quite lonely owning and running a business, because you need to make sure you're supported by a strong team, but you also need I've got a really good external support network of other MDs of businesses that do completely different things, but that you need to be prepared for, you know, some young kid that comes in and you think, that's made me look really stupid. Why did I not think of that? But that's the reason you're asking the question. So I think, you know, asking, communicating, listening, and really, really listening are, you know, what can really, really make the difference. Because, you know, like when you're trying to improve things in the business, I employ 115 people. Those people are generally all experts in what they do. I'm a so-called, well, I wouldn't call myself an expert. I own and lead the company, or, you know, chair the company. You know, they are the people that really know. You know, they need to be coached, and, you know, I think that coaching thing as well. You know, it's an easy word to say, but I put something out on LinkedIn the other day actually saying, you know, has anyone got any, you know, we think we do some good coaching, but actually we need to learn to be better coaches, because, you know, there's a difference between training and coaching, and at certain aspects you need to train people to do things, but obviously coaching can be much more effective. So yeah, it's those skills that I think we're coming to realize will have the biggest impact on the business, hopefully for the next 30 years.
Brilliant. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to that question for the other members of the panel, but I just want to make sure we get through the questions we have coming through as well. But we'll move on to Alice, and we've got a pre-submitted question for you. Is that, being the CEO of Hethel, you have multiple sites, different partners to be working with. What advice would you give to other business leaders and other organisations when forming relationships with partners and with other organisations?
I think two key things, really. The first one being, are you being proactive enough? And I always try and do that check of, is the door open? Have I got my open for business sign out? Do people know that they can contact me? I think a lot of organisations kind of go, oh, we don't get a lot out of collaboration, or we don't get a lot of connections with other businesses. And it's kind of, well, have you asked yourself the question of, does anyone know you want to be spoken to, or you want to be connected with? So it's about putting things out on LinkedIn, like you were saying, Will. You wanted a bit of help on something, a bit of advice, chuck it up on LinkedIn. People know that they are able to get in touch with you. So being proactive and finding, I suppose, and making opportunities for those connections to be made is really important. And I think the other thing is about keeping, once you get those connections and have a collaboration, about keeping it open. If you're too strict about what you're talking about or the project you're working on, once that's over, you might not have too much to continue talking to them about. So if you are working on a 2-week-long project, leave time, and it was about, I was saying earlier, leave time for the fun stuff. Leave some time to have coffee with that person and learn more about them, so that if something else comes up down the line, you've got in your head and they've got in their heads that, oh, we spoke about that thing over coffee, I might get in touch with them. So don't be really focused on what you're working on. Have a bit of breathing space in there to be able to make that connection. I think they're probably my two.
Brilliant. I wondered if any of the other members of the panel wanted to jump in on that and contribute any tips or kind of how you establish positive relationships. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to get involved. If not, we can carry on with the Q&A section. So our first question from Ahmed says, can any of the speakers please elaborate or give their own experience on how new styles of leadership should deal with the uncertainty of everything and continuous changes because of COVID-19? Sometimes it's difficult when you can't predict. In higher education sector, for example, it's been difficult to predict and respond accordingly. Who wants to jump in on that question? Muffin?
I suppose the first thing that comes to mind with that question is the detail in the language, is that you can plan, but you can't predict. What we've certainly learned from the last 12 to 18 months is that you can plan a number of things, but you can't predict the things that will change that plan. And I think if you are surrounded by good people and understand why that original plan was put in place, it's easier to amend and change. But what I would say is, don't stress about the fact that things change and things change in a way that you can't predict, because you can park that, because that will never change. I can guarantee once a week, once a month, there'll be an email there or a phone call that will come out of the blue, that will come out of the side. And you can't worry that you didn't predict it, but you can hope that you're surrounded by people that can work with you to plan to react to it. And that is what I would take from that. I would never get myself too concerned about the things that I can't predict, but I should try and have myself and my team in a way that can react well to that change.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jonathan. Anyone else want to jump in on that question? Alice, to see you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I think just to add to what Jonathan has said, you can never predict everything that's going to come, but it's about having multiple plans and backup plans to those ones. We found in the first lockdown, we spent a few days kind of frantically writing our response, and this is what we're going to do. And then it changed, and all of that time had been wasted, and we had to throw that out of the window. Whereas if we'd taken a wider look and we didn't have that tunnel vision at the start, we might have had that option, and that time wouldn't have been wasted. We could have come up with 3 or 4 plans and just gone, oh, okay, 1's not going to work anymore, let's go for 2, and then we'll probably go to 3 if it changes again. So try not to get stuck on one plan and put all of your resource behind it. Have a few options kind of on the go as well that you can fall back on.
Brilliant. We've got Andy and Charlotte unmuted. I'll pass over to Charlotte first, and we'll come to you, Andy.
Thanks, Jordan. Within Make UK, we're quite a complex organisation. We're probably 10 different businesses all put together. So to just have one plan is never possible. It's almost like having a ship with different holes that pop out, and the team have to come together. You know, one breath we're an employment law firm, the next breath we've got a series of what we call venues, so hospitality, hotels, catering type facilities. We're also a technical training centre with hundreds of apprentices. So I've highlighted a couple there that automatically, I'm sure our audience today will be thinking, oh crikey, the poor sort of souls that are trying to make sure those teams are all gelling together. But what I think is at the heart of it is the ability for the team to collaborate, to come together, but that solidarity. You know, I'm in a part of the team at the moment that's extremely busy, but we're really empathetic and want to make sure that our colleagues in the other areas, you know, that they're content, that they're as well as they can be, and that we prepare them for when those lights go back on and we can really hit the ground running again.
Brilliant. Andy, I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, I think just to kind of just work off the comments really, but I think so higher education, so some of the examples I've given is about really understanding that idea of organisational health, which offers a balance in terms of well-being and making sure that the organisation is in a good place in the longer term, rather than taking too many kind of short-term decisions. And I think UEA has been particularly good at that. I think I'll work off Will's point as well about, you know, using the collective expertise that exists in the organisation and staying in touch with what other people are thinking and feeling and can offer in terms of, you know, advice and guidance on what you should be doing, and not getting isolated from that. I think it's a really big point. And the kind of sensitivity analysis. So the question does ask about the higher education sector. So one of the vulnerabilities was staff. So what happens if a member of staff is no longer able to come to work for a period because they're unwell? So every module throughout the university had 2 people assigned to it, whereas typically it would be 1. So we had a contingency and a recovery plan in place. And the other thing I think is how far you kind of chase the pendulum swinging, you know, in terms of the current situation. So the university made a decision to do its capacity planning based on a 2-metre social distancing rule at a time when the government was saying this is 1 metre plus, because the kind of retraction and being, you know, moved around, you know, small boat on a big sea, if you like, and being bounced around was something that the university recognised it needed to stay away from and offer some stability and certainty. And so by tempering some of the external kind of influences, I think it helped to stabilise things as well. Just answering the second part of that question about specifically what did the higher education sector did. I think those are 2 examples anyway that might help answer that question.
Brilliant. Thank you for all of the panel members for answering that question. Hopefully Ahmed is happy with your responses. But the next question we have is to all again. How does your organisation still need to evolve to fit the new and fast-changing environment caused by the pandemic? I'm going to pick on Will to jump in on this one, first of all. So, Will, how does your organisation still need to evolve to fit the new and fast-changing environment caused by the pandemic?
I think we were lucky in a way that by the nature of our business, we're fairly agile. You know, we work on some very, very short lead time projects, you know, so I'll work within live music or theatres, you know, those sort of like stage spectaculars requires you to be super agile. So, you know, obviously that side of the business is completely dead at the moment. You know, there's not a lot of live music spectaculars being built or any theatre work being done. But because we're quite diverse, we've then, you know, actually grew last year. You know, we saw growth within our business, and we're looking at possibly 20% managed growth this year. But that agility helped, you know, when we need to do the ventilator parts, when we need to do. But the one thing we want to continue to, you know, we're nationwide known for our apprenticeship program, and Richard's campaigning about apprenticeships regionally and nationally, but it's about our learning culture throughout the business. And I think, you know, what I've realized more recently is something that Norfolk and Suffolk really does lack, and where we do struggle and where we need to maybe work with the UEA to get more people to stay, is diversity. You know, whether that be diversity in the fact that I walk on my shop floor and there's very, very few women. There's a lot of very white, middle-aged men. You know, we have women in senior leadership roles within the business. So from, you know, if you look at the pay scale, women are on average paid more than men. So that's not the problem, but we've got a lack of diversity sex-wise, but also ethnically. Norfolk and Suffolk isn't particularly ethnically diverse in its own right. Obviously, places like the UEA are quite ethnically diverse, and some of the cities, Norwich is obviously more than that. But, you know, we need to encourage more diversity into our business, because, you know, just thinking about having more of the female mind on the shop floor. The female mind is different from the male mind. You know, how much further forward as the business would we be if we could utilize that group of people to make our business better? So it's something that we are now focusing on as a business, and we're even talking to the local councils about. We've got this idea about single person modular living accommodation for our work with the homeless, but also to house apprentices. If we could provide high quality, low cost housing near the factory, we might be able to attract a more diverse workforce from further afield across the country. And, you know, that's something we're really focusing on at the moment.
Really, really interesting stuff. Does anyone else want to build upon what Will had said about for your respective organisation? Anyone want to jump in? Charlotte, I see you've unmuted.
Thanks, Jordan. I'm going to steal a phrase that I heard Professor Jan Godsell from WMG use, and Jan talked about in The Matrix, the film, you either take the blue pill and you carry on in ignorant bliss. You know, I jump back in the car, I spend hours burning through loads of fuel and probably not using my time to the best advantage, or do you take the red pill and try and transform what you're doing for good? I think that's probably easier said than done. I guess one of the thoughts we're having right now, and we are owned and led by our members, so it's sort of half the job is done, because we get to consult with a great board of members that give us their opinions and their steer. But how do we get ourselves ready for when the world wants to get back to some newer form of working? I'm not going to say back to normal, but a newer form of working. And how do we make sure that there isn't then inequality for the people that still want to engage virtually, but perhaps can't make the physical commitment? So that's what's kind of keeping me up at night at the moment. Please put your answers on a postcard and send them to South Lincolnshire.
I think, Jordan, if I could just, I think it's going to be even harder than transferring from, you know, real to virtual to this blended environment where, you know, a school teacher at the moment needs to teach the 6 kids that are in the class and virtually teach all the children at home. Very, very difficult. It's a lot easier when they were all at home or they're all in the class. I think this blended environment, you know, where there's a massive value in face-to-face communication, but I think people will make sure there is real value in that face-to-face communication before they drive 3 hours to visit someone. But I think the real winners out of this are going to be the businesses that can exploit this blended, mixed, way of working, where we get the best of both worlds. Because none of us want to be sat in our front room or in our studies on our own for the next 20 years. I've been blessed in the fact that our factory is operational, so I need to be there some of the time. I before the call started, been clearly told me, don't come in if you're doing too many Zoom calls, because you're very disruptive in the office. But yeah, I think it's going to be, we're going to see some real winners and losers there. The people can really embrace that blended environment.
Fantastic. We'll go over to Jonathan.
I'll just jump in there. Obviously, we're an organisation that globally helps companies understand their complex problems. And we saw initially when COVID hit, there was a lot of reactionary problems. There's a lot of enforced change. Right or wrong, people made changes quite big, quite quickly. And to agree with Charlotte, the really interesting point from our point of view, we're now starting to see people using our process from a risk and a planning point of view about what problems could they face when they make their next change. Hybrid work environment, different employment types and contracts. Do we need our physical sites? Do we need the whole building, but not in the same way that we did before? Can we still go into customers' homes the same way we did? Can we still deploy our products in the same way that we did? And it will not all be positive. I think we're seeing that. And we talked, I think Andy talked earlier about the iPhone management and leadership generation. This has enforced digital evolution quicker than anything else ever could. And at least 80% of that will stick. And at least 80% of the population will catch up with it soon. You saw the contactless limit change from 30 to 45 and probably go into 100. These types of solutions that get put in place, you're going to see more in the next year than you saw in the year that's just been. And that will be the really interesting thing to watch.
Brilliant. I see, Andy, you've unmuted. Is this to share your thoughts on the question as well?
Yeah, it was just to add to the discussion, really. It was a conversation I had with someone that works in quite a large SME in the sector in the region, and he was talking about the kind of the challenge for the business in managing the transition out of all of this uncertainty, and particularly his interest was in what he described as people on the production line, front end of the business, that were having to go to work, a bit like Will was saying, and they're still doing the kind of shift patterns or whatever it is, but the office workers were all working from home. But he'd recognised that culturally, in the longer term, that wasn't necessarily a good thing. So he could see some problems in that, in creating some cultural division, because the new ways of working were kind of physically separating the two groups, and he was puzzling into how to kind of reconcile that, and what the cost would be of either, not enforcing, but certainly encouraging office workers to come back to the factory, or to accept that, and work with the new ways of working, but what would be the implications culturally, when you're thinking about a systems perspective, as Jonathan said earlier, rather than, developing silos through implementing a different ways of work business model. So that seemed a really interesting question. Brilliant. Sorry, it's not an answer, it's more of a question.
No, absolutely fine. Alice, I see you've unmuted. Do you want to add to this point as well?
Yes, yeah, slightly kind of different line, but something that we still need to do, I suppose, to aid our adaptation is, I've got this kind of niggling voice in the back of my head going, you don't have any data to prove which adaptations you have done are the best ones and the ones you should carry on with. We adapted so quickly, almost overnight. We didn't put anything in place to be able to measure the outcome of those changes. So now there are some things that we're kind of doing because we're used to it, some things that we're doing because we can't go into the office, and I don't have any data to back up. So when we go back to the office or when we return to whatever it's going to be, and we're moving towards that more blended approach like Will was describing, I'm not going to have any data to kind of go, right, I want to keep that because it was really effective and I want to get rid of that one because it wasn't. And I suppose it kind of goes back to what Jonathan does as a business day to day, kind of looking at, okay, we made these changes, but what impact has that had? So that needs to kind of be a focus for me, definitely going forwards, and actually measuring the impact that all of these changes that have come, some are good, some are bad, and making the decisions from that information.
Brilliant. Thank you for your answer, Alice. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to launch into our final poll of the day, which has been the question I've been waiting to ask everyone. And that is, do you agree with this statement? COVID-19 was or is the disruption that businesses and the public sector needed. So we're thinking about the way that businesses and our services are run. Has this disruption caused by COVID-19, has that helped us? Has it made the changes that we needed to make? Has it made us take that time to reflect on how we traditionally do business and provide these vital services? So I'll give you just some more time. Do you agree with the statement, COVID-19 was or is the disruption businesses and the public sector needed? So we've got some answers coming in. Just waiting for a few more of you to answer this question. Got an interesting mix here. This is now the moment where you all take a step back and think, has this period been positive for us, for our organisation? Or has it been the worst year you could think of? So a few more of you to respond to the poll. Or maybe some of you have get your drink and get onto your lunch nice and early. I'm going to end the poll now. And I'm going to share the results. We can see overwhelming agreement that COVID-19 has been the disruption that businesses and the public sector did need. So it'd be really interesting to hear. I'm just going to ask that to the panel. Do any of you agree with that, with the overwhelming majority? Any of you disagree? Any of you want to kind of weigh in on those results? Will, I see you've unmuted yourself.
I think it's difficult saying that it's what we needed because we didn't need that many people to die, but it's just accelerated the inevitable. You know, the effect it's had on retail. Retail in its old form in shopping centres was dying anyway. It's just killed it off quicker. You know, there needs to be massive innovation. You know, we had the sustainability, the lack of travelling, the lack of air travel, people have seen a difference. They've seen what the future could look like. You know, it's not going to stay like this. It's going to go, we're going to step back on the, people driving more, but maybe not all the way back. And I think it's done some good. We didn't want 100 and whatever thousand people to, unnecessarily die for that. But, it's taught us a very valuable lesson, and probably just, it's one of those things you like with retail. It's like we knew we had to sort it out, but now the problem's been sorted out for us. But probably more importantly is the sustainability, point. We've got to, that's a much bigger problem than COVID. It's not, we can't fix it, cheaply with a vaccine and a couple of lockdowns. It's a structural problem we've got to try and solve. So that's for another day, but we've all got to do our bit. Brilliant.
I see Andy, you've unmuted. Do you want to add to this question?
Yeah, I just again picking up from that point, and I think it's equally as relevant in the private sector and public sector is you get these, culture in an organisation kind of develops its own sort of self-imposed false boundaries about, justification as to why you can't change the way you do things. And I think COVID has kind of smashed that to bits, and organisations have realised that actually we can do this. So there's more of an openness to change, and some of those kind of rigidity that kind of exists in organizations, because an organization has done things the same way for a long time, and so that it gets quite an ingrained belief that it's the right way to do things. So it's I think it's shaking things up for a lot of business models, like I said, right the way across the piece, really. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of unravels over time, really.
Fantastic. Any of our other panelists want to chip in here? Hi, Charlotte.
Hi, Jordan. I mean, just to Will's point, not ignoring the extremely sad deaths and also the redundancies that we've seen play out, particularly in the manufacturing sector. Actually, we've seen it force the hand of many manufacturers, or perhaps those that had already embraced different ways of working have really kind of flourished. So whether that be the way that you train people and the way that you embrace digital within the organisation, the way that technology has enabled businesses to be more resilient, or they've really seen the need to be more resilient moving forwards. But actually the transformation that the sector now has an ambition for. So we've seen people that have gone from supplying an aerospace component to wanting to sell their capability as a service to multiple sectors around the world. And I think that's really exciting. Many of our members have told us that their perception during COVID-19, their own kind of the perception of the community of their business has been really positive, and I think that's great. And I was just pondering over Alice's point around what measures and what data do we have, but we can now engage with thousands, literally thousands of manufacturers across a month. I can talk to tens, if not hundreds, with them in a week. So although the value, you could argue, may be perhaps not as great as going around a factory tour, my ability to reach out to a much larger audience and make sure that Will's voice and people that are making all sorts from, a rural area like Norfolk and Suffolk, that those views really do get to the people that need to hear them. And the important bit is that they then make change for those businesses and it doesn't fall on deaf ears.
Brilliant. Alice or Jonathan, anything to add on that point?
The only thing I'd say is that it's picking up partly on what Will said earlier as well, as a sort of pan-European business that also works a lot in Africa. The time zones are actually quite close together, and what it has led to us is we've been able to reach more people at more varied times to deliver more varied content with zero travel time, with zero travel cost, with zero emissions. And we've learned from this that some of the in-house training we struggled to do in parts of Scandinavia was because the people were at really disparate locations in those countries, and it just was never even a consideration to travel somewhere to a physical location. And we've seen a definite upturn in our reach during this period that now will not change, because these areas that previously missed out on the skills and the training because of where they were, that has just evaporated. So it's been a real positive for us on that respect, and one we didn't necessarily predict in the way that it has played out.
Brilliant. Alice, I'll give you the opportunity if you want to add anything. Are you happy with what's been said?
Everyone has covered all the things I had jotted down when the question came out, so no, nothing else to add.
Brilliant. I think we had a chat on last week's How to Collaborate session with a creative startup who was saying that if COVID-19 wouldn't have happened, they wouldn't have these global opportunities available to them. So that, touching on Jonathan's point, being able to reach international customers more effectively has definitely been a benefit of COVID-19, despite all of the negatives and terrible things that are going on around us. But that brings us to the end of our How to Lead session. A big thank you to all of our speakers and panelists this morning, and also a big thank you to all of you who are watching, whether that's live or a recording. We hope this has given you some ideas to ponder over and to implement within your organisation to help you lead more effectively. This was the final session of our 3-week How To series. I hope that whether you attended one or all 3, you found something valuable to take away with you to your respective organisation. In the follow-up, we'll be sending a type form survey out where we'd love to hear your thoughts on the event, what worked well, what didn't work well, and how we can continue to improve our delivery of events and workshops and provide you with valuable and thought-provoking content. As I've said before the session began, a recording of the session will be circulated in the coming days, as well as any links or information that the panel also want to share with all of you. Please do keep an eye out on the Hethel Innovation Eventbrite and our events page to see what else is coming up. And of course, if you want to hear how we can support your organisation, please visit our website. But finally, thanks again for joining us and have a fantastic rest of your day.